we had a birthday for our youngest a couple weeks ago, and some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. But we get him these gifts, and then he opens the gifts, and then he thinks the box is cooler than the gift. And literally, he's sitting there playing on the ground with this box, and I'm looking at my wife like, why did we buy that? I could have gone to pick up some boxes and we would have been fine, right? But he's at total peace with a box rather than this toy, right? So rather than these things that we have said, we went out and purchased and we're like, oh, this is what he wants. This is what he needs. And we bring it home, he opens it, and we're excited to see his face. And the toy is like, but there's a box. And I think for some of us during this time, during this season in our lives, we have created this idealized dream or what we think we need in order to find contentment. Because in our lives, and especially I find during this season, we're reminded, like, if we're young, we want to be older. If we're old, we wish we were younger. If it's old, we want something new. If it's new, we want something newer. If it's small, we want something bigger. If it's big, we want something really big. If we have $100, we want $200. If we have $200, we want $500. If we have an apartment, we want a condo. If we have a condo, we want a house. If we have a house, we want a bigger house, a nicer house, a newer house. And then we want to scale back down to a condo. We dream of a better job, a bigger job, a better boss, unless you work at Ecclesia, better benefits, more challenges, bigger opportunities. And if we're single, we dream of being married. And if we're married, don't say it. Don't say, that was a test. That was a test. And whatever we want or think we deserve, it has a time deadline attached to it, doesn't it? For some, I've met with people and they literally have every single thing mapped out for their life, for them to experience the fulfillment and the peace that they think they deserve or that God wants to give them. And it's crazy, you know, and so when we see this, now I want to be clear, discontentment is not always a bad thing. There are certain things that you should not be okay with. Right? There's mediocrity, right? That may be in our lives or different things that we should not be, oh, I'm content in this mediocrity. No, that's not what we're talking about. But there's a discontentment that can take us in a road that is in opposition to God. And when we think about this, especially during the holiday season, just more and more I find that contentment is a much harder thing to try and have and to find. Because there's just certain emotions that the holidays bring up, isn't there? There's emotions that and it's not just in our lives, like literally it's brought into our lives, right? Like Hallmark has all of their holiday specials. And you get caught up in all these emotions and all of these things, and it seems like insecurities that I've been able to hide all year are suddenly thrown in my face when someone has a new car with a bow on it, and my wife's looking at me, and I'm like, I love you too, I swear. Like it just seems like it's just the stakes are higher, and we're reminded of maybe where we're not. Or we're trying to find satisfaction with where we are by looking at other people. I'm more happy than them, or I'm less happy than them. And we do this spiritually as well. And what makes it harder during the holidays is those people are our family members a lot of the time. Why have I not arrived yet? Where did I go wrong? Why hasn't this happened yet in my life? Why is life unsettled? Why is it still undefined? Why am I in the season of waiting still? And the holiday time can be a reminder of what's not in my life anymore, or who's not in my life anymore. And so where do I find this contentment in the happiest time of year? Well, after the fall in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve ate that fruit, it set into motion really the reality that we will never be fully satisfied again with anything on this earth. And so within us, there is always this discontentment for something else. And literally in Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says that God has placed eternity in our hearts. Okay? So you have eternity in your heart. Eternity is the fulfillment. It is the perfection of everything. And so within you is this desire. He literally created this desire that he knew anything in this world, whatever it is, nothing will solve that desire. Nothing will fix that. You literally have that in you. And so we're born into this and this desire for the perfection and fulfillment of everything. So what happens is we take this whole discontentment thing and we take it in the wrong direction to try and fill this void that God has clearly stated only he can fill. And what we find more and more is we see these verses and we go, wow, that actually reflects how I feel. You know, Proverbs 14:30, it says, a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. Ecclesiastes 4:4. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. And we see this discontentment. We see it flare up all throughout our Bible. In Mark chapter 9, verses 33 and 34. And don't worry, I'm going to get to Genesis. But in Mark chapter 9, you're like, 33 and 34. Jesus and his disciples have been traveling. And they finally get to Capernaum. And they had this conversation as they were traveling. And in these verses, it says this. And they came to Capernaum. And when Jesus, was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent. For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. Okay, now here's what's kind of crazy about this. The disciples are following Jesus, right? That's who they're following. They're following Jesus, yet in this split second, in this moment, all of a sudden, they look around. They're supposed to be following Jesus here, and they look around and they go, I wonder who the greatest is. I wonder how I measure up. I wonder how I stack up to Peter or to John. You know, I feel like Jesus may like him more. I wonder like who's going to be what and where. And how he's going to reward us. And literally, they're having this argument as they're following Jesus. And Jesus ends the argument by picking up a toddler. And says, here you go. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm about. This is the humility. This is how you view your relationship with me. And then in Genesis 15, and you could turn there. You're already there. In Genesis 15. Now, Abraham and Sarah's name have not been changed yet, so it's Abram and Sarai. And we see in chapter 15 a situation that many of us have heard before. And the setting is, in chapter 13, God had told Abram, I am going to bless you. You are going to have offspring. But in chapter 15, it hasn't happened yet. And so Abram, like we do sometimes, we feel like we need to remind God of his promises. And so in chapter 15, verse 2, it says, But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, just in case you forgot, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. He's not my son, God. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Okay? So doubt is creeping in. God, this was your plan. You said this. Hey, God, you said this. Still not happening. Just in case you forgot, God, if this doesn't happen, that's who my heir is. And we see that God reaffirms this promise. And Abram, it says, believed, right? It counted as righteousness. He believed in what God had said in that moment. But all of a sudden, we turn the page to Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. And 10 years later, all of a sudden, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Not only has the Lord not provided, he's preventing it, Abram. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Like, do you see what happened here? So God has not only promised it, but then he reconfirmed his promise. But now a few years has gone by, and it's still not happening. We're old, God. We're not like we were when you made this promise. And so, God, this really hasn't happened on your timetable or on our timetable. And so, God, you had your window, you had your shot, you didn't deliver. We're going to take matters into our own hands. Because God, you're not doing your job. Now, they didn't say that, did they? Well, Sarai did. She's like, God's preventing this. But we see Abram listen, and we see that in their discontentedness, because they're not content anymore with God's way, God's time, he no longer has the chief seat. They say, okay, God, it hasn't worked out, and so now we're in this place. We can't wait any longer, so we're going to take matters into our own hands. Now, who does this sound like? Man, this sounds a lot like me. We do this a lot. And we're like, man, God, I thought you were leading me here. God, I thought this was about you. And it maybe was. And maybe at one point we were following him in this, but for whatever reason, because we have our timetable, we have what it means for him to actually deliver, it's not adding up to how we want. And so we take matters into our own hands. And at one point, in something that we were content in, we are no longer content in the sovereignty of God because we have snatched that from him and said, God, no, we know what's best. And then turn to 1 Kings. In 1 Kings chapter 3, we see another situation, and it's another great beginning. We see Solomon is taking the throne from his dad. He's this young 20-year-old ready to conquer the world. And God has just shown up and literally asks him, what do you want? And in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 7, Solomon responds. And he says, and now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. There was about 4 million at this time. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall rise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. That's a pretty good deal. That's pretty incredible. Some of us are like, God, anytime you want to do that, I'm ready. And we see this promise to Solomon at this early age because of what Solomon requested. And we see where his heart's at. We see that he's resting in the sovereignty of God. Like, God, I am well aware of my insecurities. I'm well aware of my inability to go out, to come in, to lead this immeasurable number of people, God. I can't do that. And so, God, I need you. And so I sovereignly submit my life to you, and I ask for your wisdom, your discernment, God, and right from wrong, because it's all about you. I want to please you. And we see God respond to that request. But then once again, we turn some pages. Once again, he's no longer 20, he's 50. And in 1 Kings 11, it says this. I still love the sound of pages. Like, if you're a swiper, that's cool. But pages, I like that. Says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives. I know. Don't even go down that road. Who were princesses. That's a different conversation. And 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old. Now this is important. For when Solomon was old. Did you see that? You are never beyond temptation or beyond a time where you could fall. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the god of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Listen. Solomon had more than anybody else. There was nobody else on the planet that he could go, oh, I wish I was like that. I wish I had that. Or I wish I could compare to that. No, there was no one else other than God. No one else. There's no way we could say, oh, I need this. He had anything and everything he wanted. In any department, whatever it was. And yet that wasn't enough, was it? It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. One wife obviously wasn't enough. And we see it was kind of normal in those days for kings to have these marriages, to create peace and all that. But it was also to show, look at me. And we see that for whatever reason, that wasn't enough. And so he had to have more. And somebody that we would say, oh, he's arrived. He's at peace. And if he just does what he did as a 20-year-old, like God's going to lengthen his days. He's going to have this incredible life and all of this. But we see as he's older that he starts to fall. He starts to wonder. His eyes no longer are focused on God. He starts to notice some of these foreign women. And his heart goes after that. And therefore, he starts to go down this road of idolatry, and we see now he's operating with a heart that is not content and with God's design and plan for his life. You know, some of us have actually gotten to the point in our lives where we said at one point, if we just have that, we'll be at peace or be happy. And some of you have actually arrived at that place and you don't have peace and you're not happy. And if the richest man to ever live says it doesn't deliver, why do we think any differently? You know, Solomon writes Ecclesiastes. And I wouldn't encourage you to read Ecclesiastes during the holidays. But he writes Ecclesiastes. And he's sharing how he pursued absolutely everything. Everything to the max. And he had the ability to pursue everything to the max. And yet he says that it's like striving after the wind. All these things, all this toil, all these things I'm trying to achieve, it's like striving after the wind. Now, for those of you, like, go outside, try and catch the wind. You can't do it. In fact, it just doesn't even make sense. But he says that's what it's like. when you are literally basing your identity, basing your contentment on all these things, he says, listen, I'll save you all the sorrow. I tried it all. There's nothing I didn't try. And I tried to succeed in it to the max, and it didn't deliver. It's like trying to grab the wind. And what led to his downfall? Well, it starts with making some distance-making decisions. And when I say distance-making decisions, there are decisions that you will make in your life. And if you decide to do those things which are in opposition to God's will for your life, they will create distance between you and a perfect and holy God. Because that's what sin does. Like sin at its core, it creates distance between me and God. Now, once again, you're creating that distance. God isn't creating the distance. God is trying to bring you unto himself. But when I sin and say, God, no, I'm creating that distance, and then we start to have a wrong view of God. Right? So Solomon's view of God became, you should please me. Give me the desires of my heart. He had a wrong view of himself. I deserve this. If I had this or that or her, then I would be happy, more happy. It's a wrong view of culture too. Because everyone else says this will work, this will make me happy, and it's culturally acceptable. What Abram did was culturally acceptable. That doesn't mean that it's God's way or that it honors God, but when we start to distance ourselves from God, we start to be okay with things that are okay culturally, but in reality, those very things are actually in opposition to God. And we justify things we have no business justifying. And at the core of it, what it does, it creates discontentment in our lives because these things won't deliver, and it creates distance from God. Well, what are the things that create contentment in our lives? How do we get that in our relationship with God? And we see some incredible examples of people that were able to have this regardless of what was going on in their lives. And one in particular is Paul. And in Philippians 4, 11 through 13, Paul is writing from a prison to the church of Philippi, and he says these incredible words. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low and know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret. We're like, ooh, of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And then he also continues on in another letter in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10. And in verse 8, right before that, he's talked about this thorn to the flesh and how he's prayed over it to be delivered. And it won't be delivered. Whatever that thorn to his side was, we don't know. But he was prayed for it to be taken from him. But he says this in verse 9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. What's the secret? What's the secret? Jesus is the secret. Jesus is the secret. It's his strength. His grace is sufficient, right? His grace is sufficient. Your grace for you is not sufficient. Other people's grace for you is not sufficient. His grace is sufficient for you. It's all about his plan. Paul is content because it's his plan. It wasn't Paul's plan. And because it's his plan, he can go through all things because who will strengthen him? Jesus. And so for you in this room, listen, man, some of you have had some hard things happen in your life. Some of you have experienced some incredible loss, some incredible pain. Some of you are somewhere you didn't choose in your mind. You didn't choose to be where you are. You didn't want to have the emotions, the thoughts that you have, but they're there. And I'm telling you right now that Paul says, I found the secret. But the reality is sometimes we want to know the secret, but we don't want to apply the secret. And he says, this is the secret. This is the secret. And he's not speaking and saying this from this throne disconnected from reality. He's in prison. He has suffered. He has experienced these things. He currently, when he's saying this in 2 Corinthians, he currently is like, I have the gift of healing and I can't heal myself right now. And it's not working. He says, but I have found the answer, I found the secret, and for the sake of Christ, for Christ's plan and purpose, I can go through this because he will strengthen me. You know, we've been talking about Daniel. This is your first Sunday. We just talked about Daniel a lot. And we've been going through Daniel, chapters 1 through 6. And one of the things that we learned is that Daniel is in exile. He's been jacked out of his home. He's in exile in Babylon, a pagan land where they do not worship God. And he's there, and he is in this season of waiting for 70 years. Okay? He ends up waiting almost 70 years. So we're like, man, God, I'm in this season of waiting. Really? It's been like 2 months, okay? Like, get on your knees, okay? So, literally, almost 70 years, Daniel is in the season of waiting, and we're like, oh man, what's the secret? What did he do? Well, if we remember way back when, in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, we actually see the secret as this young, pimple-faced boy says this, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. So he made a decision as a youth. You wonder why youth ministry is important? He made this incredible decision as a youth that he was not going to defile himself. He was not going to allow anything that was brought into his life in this pagan land to take him away, to draw his heart away from a perfect and holy God. And he had all the offers. He was promoted. All these things happened in his life. And yet at an early age, he made a commitment. I am not going to allow these things to defile me, to turn my heart, to turn my life away, my mindset, everything. I'm not going to allow it to turn me away from a perfect and holy God who loves me. And just because I'm in this season of waiting, which turned out to be like a long time, that does not mean I am going to give anything else my heart. That does not mean I am going to allow my circumstances to dictate my mindset. That doesn't mean I'm going to look at the other people that didn't get taken. That doesn't mean I'm going to look at the other people that are having all these things in their lives, this incredible family, all these things, and yet, for whatever reason, I'm the one who's got to be this guy. Nothing was going to replace God's throne in his life. That's the secret. You put him on the throne, then you keep him on the throne of your heart and your mind. He's what you exist for. He's your purpose. In Proverbs 19:23, it says, the fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm. Okay, the fear of the Lord here, and what we're talking about is this reverential awe that we have of God. When it talks about the fear of the Lord, this reverential awe, so he is here. And if I will operate within the mindset of putting him here in my life as a byproduct of that, what does it say? And whoever has it rests satisfied, content. Psalm 37:3-4. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Man, we like the last part, but we don't quote the first part. If you delight yourself in him. If you befriend faithfulness, put him on that seat. Trust and delight in him. Follow him, and he will bring the fulfillment of the desires of your heart. And here's the reality with that verse, because we use that verse against him. You have lost your ability to critique what he's doing. You don't have that spot. You can't critique that. You know why you can't critique that? Because you don't know what the fulfillment of the desires of your heart is. Right? When I look at my life right now, and I have to be careful, almost all of it, because I do like my life, almost all of it is not the fulfillment of the desires of what I thought my heart was in my heart. Okay, starting with what I do. I never wanted to do this. Like there's certain kids and they just grow up and they're groomed to take the pastoral position. And I was like, I have seen that. Don't want it. I like even like marriage, like I know some of us like Disney and we dream of it and all. I didn't. I wasn't like, I just want to be married. That'll bring it. Yeah, that's what I need. No. Kids, I was the one that you laughed at when I would hold a kid. I've got 3 of them, all looking at me. And even like, I can go down the list of all these things that I find incredible fulfillment and contentment in. And I look and I see God's best in it. And guess what? That was not at all what my heart's desire was way back in the day. And I am so thankful he did not give me what I prayed for him to give me back in those days. Because I had no idea what I really wanted. I had no idea what the fulfillment of my heart was. And so when God is working on you, when you're following and pursuing him, you cannot critique his work because you don't really even know what the fulfillment of your heart would be or could be or should be. And some of you are a testimony to that right now. You look at, there's certain things in your life and you go, I am so content. And 10 years ago, you would have been like, oh, no. But when you do things God's way, that's what God does. And you lose all of this, like, this sense of all these things have to align how I think they should in order to be content. That no longer is the case. God becomes enough for you. See, when we think about all these things, discontentment happens when my eyes wander off him. That's when it happens. When we look around, we romanticize other people's lives, relationships, careers, or we'll even look at people and we'll be like, oh, they haven't suffered like me. And then we say, if I just had that, or that's the one thing I'm missing, and if I have that, I'll be okay. Or we ask, like the disciples, how do I stack up? How do I compare to that person? And the reality is, comparison is the enemy of contentment. You know, Proverbs 12:2, it says, do not be conformed to this world. In other words, you have a decision. You are either going to conform to the value system of everybody else that the world, that the culture says is going to make you happy, or it says you can do this. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And then in Proverbs 23:17, it says, let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Do you see that? It says, let not your heart envy sinners. Do not conform to the world. Do not let your heart envy sinners. Now we go, well, of course, Steve. Well, here's the reality. That doesn't align with a lot of our beliefs and our actions. Because when we actually look at, we're envious, a lot of us, we're envious of people with a totally different value system. It doesn't even make sense. Like, I want to follow Jesus. They don't. I want to obey God. They don't. But I want their life. Like, they're literally going in a different direction than I am, than I say I am, than what I say, who I want to follow, than I want to say who I'm obedient to and what I'm about. And yet, I want their life. And I'm comparing myself to their life. And they think you're crazy. Like, it's crazy, but they think you're crazy too. You're like, why do they think I'm crazy? Because you don't make sense. You literally want their life, but you're telling them they need yours. Listen, how do you do what you do? Where do you, all this stuff. Hey, man, you need to come to church. You need to find out about the hope that lies within me. What are you talking about? It's a contradiction. And here's the crazy thing. We also do this with other Jesus followers. What were the disciples doing? They were following Jesus, but in this moment, they're caught up with this comparison, robbing them of what Jesus had just told them. And we look at both accounts in Mark and we look at Matthew of this same event. What we see right before that, and Matthew 17 talks about it, Jesus has just told them for the second time how he's going to be arrested, he's going to be killed, and then he's going to raise up again from the dead. And he's just told them this. And then what do? They lose sight of all of that and they start arguing over who's the greatest. In other words, them starting to compare, starting to look around, starting to envy, starting to see how they measure up and stack up, they lost their ability. It robbed from their ability to hear and to comprehend what Jesus was trying to teach them. When I start taking my eyes off of God and going in all these other directions, it robs my ability to hear and to honor Him. It robs my ability to listen to His direction in these steps that I take because I'm not looking towards Him anymore. And it can happen so quickly. They are following Jesus and this happens. And they all are desiring to follow Jesus. They're all Christians. And yet this happens. You know, when this happens, like all of a sudden, God's not enough for you. And if He's not enough for you, how are you ever going to be enough for you? When this happens, we're critical of others. We complain a lot. We have an uncontrolled ambition, a non-satisfied ambition. Your joy is gone. You lose the optimistic outlook you once had towards life. And 1 Peter 5:7, he says, cast your anxieties on Him. Cast your anxieties on Him. The problem is for a lot of us, we cast our anxieties on ourselves. But you can't handle that. You can't build it. See, we needed a Savior. You can't be the Savior of you. We needed a Savior. That's why you're here. You couldn't bear your own anxieties. Some of us, maybe we feel bad about the past, and therefore that is a reminder. The holiday time is a reminder of my past. You know, the key to a better future is to stop trying to have a better past. You can't improve your past. You realize that? It's done. And so for some of us this morning, you got to stop allowing that to have weight over your life. And you got to go, this is where God's planted me. This is where I'm at. I can move forward today. I can move forward right now. Accept it for what it is and then move forward by faith. So what is our bottom line? Serve the Lord where you are right now. Grow where you're planted. Don't live in the past. Don't live in the future. Have you ever met someone and you're like, hey, you know it's like today, right? Like live for today. Let God define your life, not your circumstances. Don't expect change to make you happy. Never forget that this is all temporary. Stop treating it like it's all eternal. We're treating our job like it's going to be our job for eternity. We're treating this person and we're allowing it to have all this weight over me when this relationship that I'm even having with this person is temporary. They're in my life for a little season here. And we're literally it's become so much, we're bearing it so much that we're acting like we're going to have it for all of eternity. No. And you are where you are, like God's sovereignty is in control of even where you are. And you can glorify God right now with where you are at. And if there is any sin right now that's causing discontentment, I plead with you to deal with it. Especially during this holiday time. We have this opportunity. You know, we have Thanksgiving, right? And Thanksgiving is this incredible opportunity to look and to acknowledge God and to give Him thanks for what He's done. But the reality is we talk more about Black Friday than we do Thanksgiving anymore. Because Black Friday reveals and shows me what I don't have. Isn't that crazy how that's literally within hours after we have a time of Thanksgiving? And that's where culture's at. Choose not to make this holiday season about circumstances or other people. Use it as an opportunity to thank God and to really ask, are you content in Him? And what if that was our mindset during this time? Philippians 4:11-13. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Listen, our baby, our third, he is the most needy child for his mommy. And I know he's the baby. That's what they are. And so literally, he just walks around looking for her. And even when I try and distract him, she's like, distract him. He's annoying me. Okay, I'm distracting him. Nope. He's like, where is she? Where is she? If she's upstairs, he's sitting at the foot, waiting for her to come back down. And then he crawls up her, hold me, hold me. Nothing will distract him from his mommy. You guys, make a decision. Make a decision. Is he enough? And if he is, nothing Nothing should distract me from him being enough. You can't save you. There is eternity built inside of you that you can't satisfy without a perfect and holy God. Give him control. Let's pray.